Slog FPV. This is my abbreviated build of the Shocker 5-inch long-range micro quad. It's super lightweight. I doubt if I'm going to get under 250 grams, but we'll see. And again, this is the 5-inch version. I selected the FPV cycle in collaboration with StanFPV. These are the pancake type motors, 2203, 3500K, 3450 kV, excuse me, motors. I thought those were quite interesting. I expect that, they're really built for cine whoops, but they also seem like they'd work well for a long range quad. So I decided on those. This is the Grip thin version. I picked these HQ props here. These are the T5 by 2 by 3 props, tri-blade. For the GPS, it's the Matek SAM-M8Q. For the battery-powered buzzer, it's the full speed Lucky Box buzzer. And again, it is battery operated. And then for the flight controller, this is the Jhemcu. I always pronounce that wrong. Jhemcu. I don't. All-in-one, 35 amp ESC capable. So it'll be interesting. This will be the first build that I've done with a truly all-in-one flight controller and ESC. So we'll see how well that works out. And for the receiver, I'm going to be running Crossfire. And then, of course, for the camera, it's going to be the Catalyst Vista, of course, with the DJI Camera, which is significantly better than the Nebula camera. So we'll see how well this thing comes together. As you can see, I have the arms installed now. They're sandwiched in between the top and the bottom plate. I would recommend using some blue Loctite. Motors have just been mounted on the frame. Here I have the pigtail and the low ESR capacitor soldered up. What I do at this point is use a smoke stopper, plug it in, make sure things are okay, and then I'll also plug in the USB port to the computer and bring up the Betaflight configurator just to make sure everything's okay before I proceed soldering everything up. So here I'm showing you the M2 by 12 button head screws that I used. I had assortment of those, and I also used some M2 nuts, and really what that was for was to hold the screws in place, and then so they're tighter for the all-in-one flight controller and ESC to be mounted on top of it. But then it also gave me enough clearance to where the USB port was above this brace here. This is what it looks like with the flight controller installed. I'm going to be soldering up the motor wires and all of the other electronics. Motor wires are now soldered on. The Vista comes with a really complete wiring diagram with color coding, so you just need to follow that. So I used UART 3 off the flight controller. So the white wire goes to the RX3 UART pad here, and then the yellow wire goes to the TX UART 3 pad. And then I used a signal ground and then another ground for power, and VCCs coming off the 9-volt Beck VCC pad here. So I also added the Vista cage and then the TPU holder for the GPS, and then also the TBS Crossfire antenna, and went ahead and mounted the Vista VTX antenna here. I did run the wires on the side because I didn't want them to interfere with going over the top here with putting on and off the antenna. I might want to go with a longer antenna, but for now I'm going to try the stock antenna that comes with the Vista. at this point I thought it made sense to finish the frame assembly. What I like about this particular frame are these this basket here. You can lift these two cross members off and then still get access to your flight controller to work on it. So I didn't like that the camera was dangling down. Didn't want to put strain on the video cable that connects to it. So went ahead and put the cross member on here, and so I can just finish soldering the rest of the UARTs up to the GPS and the TBS Crossfire are the last two things I need to do here, as well as the buzzer. So my next goal was to get these components attached to the TPU mount on the back here. For the finder, went ahead and wired that up. It's pretty simple. The outside pad here is ground, then red wires 5 volts, then the white wires minus buzz, and just neatly twisted up the wires, and looks pretty nice there. Then I went ahead and mounted the Immortal T antenna, as well as the GPS module, and again used the tie wraps to secure it. The frame kit did come with this double lock Velcro to attach it to the TPU mount, and yeah, it's on there very securely. I now have the GPS wired in. I'm using UART 2, which is on the second row of pads. So the blue wire that comes off the header goes to the RX input for UART 2, and the yellow wire goes to TX2. And then where I came off for the 5 volts is the 5 volt pad on the back here, which is the 4th pad in, and then the 5th pad in is ground. So it all wired up. So just as a general tip, what I normally do is, add components one at a time, and then I'll go ahead and validate that they're working. For example, now that I have the GPS in place, I went ahead and went into beta flight, plugged in a battery, made sure that I could get SATs and get a fixed location, and I was able to. So that's just the approach I have. And I do have a confession. I'm not very fast at doing builds. I think that I know some people will sit down and do a build in 2 hours. That's not me. What I do is, I'll work on it a little bit, 10, 15, 20 minutes at a time slot. And I think that just comes from, when I was a kid in the early 60s. Yes, I'm a boomer, a baby boomer. How I bonded with my stepdad was we used to build balsa wood airplanes. And of course those were really time consuming. You had to cut out the pieces out of the balsa wood, assemble a fuselage and the wings, and then glue them all together, and then, put the fabric over the wings and the fuselage. So, it'd take us a couple months to do something like that, just a little bit every night. And so that's kind of how I approach building things. Now, it doesn't take me months to do a build, but I usually take, a week or two to do a build. So I kind of enjoy it, and I just don't do it in 1 2-hour slot. But I do recommend that you kind of do things in stages and at a component at a time, and then test them out, the component that you just added. And again, that saves you a lot of hassle, because it's pretty aggravating. You get everything bundled, buttoned up together, and then all of a sudden one component isn't working. And then it's really hard to correct that after the fact, because usually you've tie wrapped the wires, neatened them up, and it's just harder to tear things apart once it's all together. I have the TBS Nano receiver soldered up now. The yellow wire is the RX coming into the Nano. The white wire is TX. Red wire is 5 volts, and then the black wire there obviously is ground. So So looking at the other end of it, I'm using UART 6. So again, the yellow wire is RX going to TX on the flight controller, which is the yellow wire, and then the white wire is the RX6 going into the controller, which is actually TX on the receiver side. So the weight without a battery is coming in at 234 grams. And that includes a battery strap and everything. So it's an extremely lightweight build for a 5-inch. And to compare that to my Nazgul without a battery and without a session, it's coming in at 398 grams. So substantially lighter weight than a typical 5-inch freestyle quad. If you're curious if I could get below 250 grams, no. I mean, I could drop the GPS and fly without a Crossfire receiver and probably get it quite a bit lighter and get rid of this TPU back in, but then it's not a longer range quad. So with a 4S Tat2 600 50 milliamp hour battery, it's coming in at 302 grams. You know, a battery that would be more realistic would be this 850 gram 4S battery from Tat2, and that's coming in at 339 grams. So with the Flywoo lithium ion pack, that's a 3000 milliamp hour pack, that's 4S, we're coming in at 431 grams. So before I take it out on its maiden flight, wanted to show you the finished product. I'm very pleased with the build itself. And you can see I tidied everything up here. I actually did use some Loctite for the screws. And yes, then you can see here on my Nano Crossfire receiver, I did, you know, use double-sided sticky tape and then just ran a tie wrap around it. Next, I'll show you my maiden flight. My plan was to fly some additional packs, but the weather turned bad, as you can see here. And so I wanted to get this video out. So this gives you a good representation of how smooth this thing flies. And it is definitely very efficient. let's talk about the build and what my thoughts are on it. Starting with components. So with the frame, I actually really like this frame. It reminds me a lot of the Catalyst Machineworks Smooth Operator as far as how it flies, with the lot of the mass below the prop line like it is here. It acts more like a slam deck. So the CG on this thing is right spot on. If you running about 850 milliamp hour battery, it's very light and nimble. The assembly of it was relatively easy. The Catalyst Machineworks, some of their frames, like the Smooth Operator, was a little fiddly. This one isn't, in my mind, that bad. It's pretty simple, and I like the idea of being able to access the flight controller from the bottom here by just taking off a few bolts here to just swing the frame piece out of the way. I thought it was well thought out. I got the TPU accessories, including the Mortal T and GPS mount. So I think that's why I always appreciate with Catalyst Machineworks frames. I think they do a great job of thinking the design through. And then also I like the camera protection and how easy it is to get a good angle from this thing. I like that it has some protection on the front here, because most of the time you're going to be crashing on the front versus especially with more of a long range quad. So overall, definitely give the frame 2 thumbs up. The only niggle I have of the whole frame design is the battery straps locations. They have a little TPU mount here that you slide a battery strap through, but that's quite a bit to the rear, and then on the front there's not a whole lot of space to put a battery strap, so I went ahead and cut down a larger battery strap so I could fit it in between the flight controller stack, or I should say the flight controller board, all-in-one board, and the battery, and that seemed to work out fine. So that's the only niggle I have on the frame. So on to the StanFPV and FPV Cycle collaboration 2203 motors. I thought the torque on these motors is just absolutely incredible. It reminds me an awful lot of my diesel truck. It's very linear and just all kinds of low-end torque for this motor. And then plus it's very, very linear in throttle response, which of course works great for cinewhoops, and I think it also helps out with long range because of the stator width being so wide. You can just kind of dial into a cruising speed, and it just wants to fly at that speed and just kind of idles. And with that, it is just super efficient. Even with this 850 milliamp hour battery, I was getting well over 7 minutes of flight, and when I landed, my average cell voltage was like 3.6, so I still had a little bit of gas in the tank on that. In this regard, diesel in the tank. Now, of course, the top end isn't great, but this isn't a freestyle quad, although I felt like with these motors it was super smooth doing freestyle. And so to say it can't freestyle, that's a misconception. And in fact, I think with these motors on, it flew significantly better as far as acrobatic type flying than the Flywoo here, which I thought was, I still really love this. It's below 250 grams. So for a long range mini quad, this one's great. But this one, definitely you can do some freestyle with it. It's just not going to have the top end that a higher stator motor would have, but that's not the idea. The idea here is to have super efficient, torquey motors on the low end that have a very linear response. So I'd highly recommend these motors. So on to the Jhemcu all-in-one flight controller. What I really like about this flight controller is it doesn't take up any space and is extremely light as compared to a normal, as compared to a stack. It's 35 amp. It has all kinds of UARTs. In fact, I have one spare UART still available. So it works out great as far as being able to hook up Crossfire, your Vista unit here, and all the other accessories, GPS. So that's one of the issues with some of the other all-in-one flight controller stacks. There's just not enough UARTs, and this one has plenty. The only two cons, the first, some of the pads are a little tight to solder on, and that's understandable just because there's not a lot of space on this 20mm all-in-one board to do that. The other thing, I wish it was an F7 versus an F4, and then maybe a third niggle would be it doesn't have 32-bit ESCs. I did flash JESC firmware on it so I could enable RPM filtering. So that's not a big deal, but it does cost you $5 to do that, US, but that's a niggle. But of course, I don't know what the reliability is on this. I don't think it's going to be anywhere as good as, a separate ESC all-in-one from the flight controller, but I don't know. These are newer boards. I don't have a lot of experience with Jhemcu, and time will tell as to whether or not this thing will hold up. But this isn't a racing quad, so I think for this application, where it's a cruising quad, I don't think, with 35 amp ESCs, I think it's going to be fine. Then moving on to the GPS, the Matek here is significantly better as far as lock time than the Flyboost GPS. And I'm wondering, I did, twist the leads coming off the wire harness. That does, when you twist the ground lead around signal wires, that does work as a shield. So maybe that helps, but definitely the lock time is significantly quicker on this than the Flywoo. One thing I might try on the Flywoo, I noticed they didn't twist the GPS leads, which is strange. So maybe I'll try that on here to see if that helps the lock time, but that'll be a different video. On the full speed Lucky Box buzzer, I like that it has a very small profile, and it is smaller than the Flywoo, which its dimensions are it's larger as far as the length of the buzzer. And I found that it is pretty close to the same loudness, so no problem using it as a finder when you have a battery ejection for whatever reason. And the time that it buzzes is 12 hours, so very similar to what the Flywoo finder is. And the only big difference is to reset it, you need to push this button 3 times versus on the Flywoo, you just hold it down once. So you have to push it like 3 times, 1 second intervals. Then on the last one, it'll kind of beep. And you can also reset it by, before it starts buzzing, just plug the battery back in and then unplug it. You have to do that cycle once. And it says like for 8 seconds. I don't mess with that. I just push the button 3 times. So one thing I do need to change fairly soon is the VTX antenna. It's a little short for a long range quad. What I'm going to do is when they become available, I'll pick one up. The last component to talk about is the Vista, and with the DJI Camera, it's absolutely great, for this type of application. So who would the Catalyst Machineworks Shocker really be suited for? I think if you're a long-range pilot, which I'm not, I think it's a good quad if you really want to have digital FPV feed. And I think with the 3000 milliamp hour Li-ion battery, you can easily get 20 minutes of flight time with these 5-inch props. It's very, very efficient. So, you know, if you're looking for something like that with Crossfire, you know, a finder, a buzzer finder on it, and a GPS, and that's a very, very lightweight build with super efficient motors, I think this is a good candidate. If you're like me, I like just something that is capable of doing light freestyle, but in addition gets really long flight time on a smaller battery, like an 850 milliamp hour battery. I'm good with, you know, 7 minutes to 8 minutes of flight time. That's plenty long for me. So I like exploring around the lake, around the back of my property, and this definitely is a candidate for somebody like me that likes to have something that is you know, fairly powerful. It's not the best freestyle quad, but it does do better than the Flywoo 4-inch long-range micro quad. And you know, it's ultra smooth. Another thing I really like about it, as far as flight characteristics, it is unlike the Flywoo, which I felt doesn't fly as good at lower speeds. This thing you can just hover because the motors are so linear. Doing really slow proximity flying, I mean, it kind of feels like a Cinewhoop in a way. Of course, it doesn't have ducks, but I'm just saying that it the throttle control is such that it's extremely linear. Again, I keep repeating that, but it's the truth. And so it's really easy just to hover, keep in position, and actually fly really slow with this thing. So it does have an advantage over the Flywoo. But if you're looking for a quad that is a sub 250, this is actually fairly close, but just not quite there. And I think you'd have to sacrifice too many things to get it to 250 grams with a 4S 650 milliamp hour battery, which is probably the lightest battery I would go with for this build. So with that, I greatly appreciate you tuning into my channel. Thanks.